The sound of bones breaking has a specific sound. I learned that sound on a Wednesday evening behind Al Rahma Mosque when my friends and I cornered Thomas, the son of the local Christian baker. I was 16, Thomas was 14. His only crime was sharing a Bible verse with my younger sister during lunch break at school. We waited until he was walking home from his father's bakery. The street was empty except for the stray cats that always gathered near the dumpsters. I still remember how white his school uniform was, how he clutched his school bag to his chest when he saw us, how he whispered, "Please," just once before we started. There were 4 of us. We had learned from the older boys, you don't use your fists at first, you use your feet because it hurts more. The sound of our shoes against his ribs echoed off the mosque walls. Someone was laughing. I think it was me. Then Ahmed, my cousin, brought out the metal pipe. I can still hear Thomas's scream. When the pipe first hit him, it wasn't loud. He was trying to be quiet, trying not to attract attention, but it was high-pitched, like a wounded animal. His arm bent at an angle. Arms aren't supposed to bend. I had never felt more holy than in that moment. Every strike felt like an act of worship. We had been taught that violence against infidels was pleasing to Allah. I imagine angels recording my good deeds in their books. We left him there bleeding into his white uniform. I went home, performed the wudu, and prayed to Maghrib like nothing had happened. My father saw me praying and smiled proudly. "You are becoming a good Muslim man," he said. Thomas didn't die, but he never came back to school. His father closed the bakery a month later. They moved away, and we celebrated one less Christian family in our neighborhood. But something strange happened. Every time I performed Salah, I would see Thomas's face. Not angry or scared, but sad, like he was disappointed in me. It made me angry. How dare this kafir judge me? 2 years later, I was accepted to university in Cairo. My first day there, I walked into my assigned dorm room, and there on my roommate's bed was a Bible. My roommate Amir wasn't there yet. I picked up the Bible, intending to throw it away, but as I held it, my hand started shaking. I remembered Thomas's Bible, the one we had torn to pieces while he watched before we broke his arm. I opened it randomly. The page fell open to Matthew 5. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I slammed it shut. But those words, they were like fire. They burned into my mind. What kind of God would tell his followers to love their enemies, to pray for their persecutors? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas, about his father's bakery, how it had the best bread in our neighborhood, how Thomas would sometimes give free bread to the poor kids, how he never said a bad word about Muslims, even when we tormented him. I got up and read more of Amir's Bible. Hours passed. When dawn came, I realized I had missed Fajr prayer for the first time in my life, but I couldn't stop reading. When Amir finally arrived later that day, I was ready to confront him about being a secret Christian. But when he walked in, he greeted me with "Assalamu alaikum." He had a prayer rug under his arm. "You're Muslim?" I asked, confused about the Bible. He smiled and said, "I was. Now I follow Yeshua." I should have reported him immediately. Instead, I found myself asking why. Because he said he loved me before I loved him. Over the next 6 months, Amir answered my questions. He never pushed, never pressured. He just lived his faith quietly, praying for me, loving me even when I mocked him. Then one night I had a dream. I was back behind the mosque. Thomas was there, bleeding. But this time someone else was there too, mine in white. He knelt beside Thomas, healing his wounds. Then he turned to me, his hands covered in Thomas's blood, and said, "This too is forgiven." I woke up crying for the first time since I was a child. I fell to my knees beside my bed, and all I could say was, "Jesus, forgive me." The peace that flooded me in that moment, it was like nothing I had ever felt in all my years of Islamic prayer. It was like being born again. The next morning I told Amir everything about Thomas, about the others we had hurt, about the years of hatred I had nurtured like a precious garden. He listened, then said, "Would you like to pray with me?" That was 5 years ago. My family disowned me when they found out. My father said he would rather have a dead son than a Christian one. My mother sends my siblings out of the room if I'm ever mentioned. But the hardest part wasn't losing my family. It was facing what I had done. Every convert I help now, every person I share Christ with, Nai Fiore, advice. I've tried to find him to ask his forgiveness. But maybe that's part of my penance, to live with what I did. Yesterday, I helped bandage the wounds of a young Muslim boy who had been beaten for owning a Bible. As I cleaned his cuts, I remembered how Thomas' blood had felt on my hands. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my old life. I tell them you can't miss a prison once you've been set free. The hardest chains to break were not the ones that bound me to Islam, but the ones that bound me to hatred. Jesus didn't just save my soul, he saved me from myself. He took a monster who broke children's bones and turned him into a man who bandages their wounds. That's not religion, that's resurrection.